To me, it boils down to what business are we really in? And what kind of company do you really want to build? And to me, I got it. Look, there's a lot of different things we can all do. People who are in the games business, particularly on the development side, are have to be very talented to survive in the games business. They have to be technically talented. They have to be creative. They have to, really get into the depths of some very difficult intellectual problems. So it's a very talented group. They could do a lot of different things. They could go into investment banking. They could build bridges. They could build rockets. People who exit the games business oftentimes do very well because they're so talented. And so, are we going to spend our time trying to figure out like what some monetization strategy is? Is that the best, highest and best use of our time? No, we come to the games business because we got inspired.
Hello and welcome to the Game Developer Podcast. I'm your host, Senior Editor Bryant Francis. Today we're talking to former Nexon CEO Owen Mahoney, a 25-year veteran of the game industry who caught my eye with a number of unusually candid blog posts challenging conventional business thinking about game development. It was kind of like seeing Mark Darrah's stuff. That was the former BioWare producer we spoke with a few weeks back. It's rare to encounter seasoned professionals who can speak precisely about the realities of the business. Owen's not only been critical of the fad chasing we saw for the last few years in game development, think like NFTs, some of those other VR, maybe a little too heavy on VR. He's also taken his peers to task for only chasing maximum profits and neglecting the good foundations of game production. He is really excited about generative AI. I don't share that enthusiasm. But regardless, he comes off as the rare executive concerned about the nuts and bolts of game development and how game businesses run, not just the money they can make. I wanted to pick his brain about his time at Nexon and what game companies can do to be more successful in 2025. And Owen, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. I have a fun anecdote just to kick us off. Owen, fun fact, I actually was an employee of yours when you were at Nexon way back in 2014. So I need to ask, do you have any fond memories of me? You know, those times we met when I was over at Nexon?
Well, you're really putting me on the spot to start out here. I was going to ask, how was I?
I was going to say, I really don't know because I was a contractor brought in. I was 1 day a week filling in for someone on maternity leave in the localization office, but I had a great time there. And, that whole localization team, the HR folks I spoke with, they were wonderful people. So I was like, this seems like a good place to work. Wish my contract didn't expire, but, say la vie.
Good. Well, I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to work more closely.
Yeah. That was about 2014 was kind of when you jumped from CFO to CEO, right?
Right. Yeah, it was exactly 2014. It was March.
Yeah, I just jumped in. Funny enough, March is when I've been laid off from my previous job. So it was a couple months later that I landed with y'all for a bit. I guess I don't talk to a lot of people who jump from CFO to CEO. A lot of my business. So I guess what was the number one reason you decided to make that jump? And what was the biggest change in terms of your job duties, I guess?
Really interesting question. I mean, I guess, I was offered the job. But I thought a lot about whether I wanted to do it or not. I mean, to back up, I had my history with Nexon goes way farther back than when I joined Nexon in 2010. I started my career really at the dawn of the internet, and after I left Apple Japan, I joined a company called Pointcast, and Pointcast was this early online internet. It was this early internet company, and my job was to build up Asia Pacific. And along the way, I had met the founder of Nexon and the guys who were starting the company. And so I had known him and them for some time. And then when I joined Electronic Arts in 2000, when I first met Jay Kim from Nexon, it was literally like one room with five people and a bunch
Hmm.
of top ramen. And then by the time I joined EA in 2000, a few years later, they were the second biggest game company in Korea, and Korea was on a 45-degree angle up in terms of the games business. It was really an exciting place to, and with a ton of vibrancy and a ton of originality, and they really just had this great approach to innovation, mostly from a bunch of people who had either been kicked out or dropped out of Seoul National and Keist, and Jay Kim was one of those people. And so I was at Electronic Arts running corporate development, which means mergers and acquisitions, meaning buying companies and business development. And long story short, we were trying to get into online very aggressively, and we're kind of flailing at it when I arrived. And we were also trying to get into Asia, and I was the only one who spoke an Asian language, had spent any time in Asia in the executive team. And so I went out there and looked for companies that we could partner with or buy or what have you. And I reconnected with Jay Kim and the team. And I ended up trying to buy the company 3 times during the 9 years that I was at EA. The first time when I just joined, second time about midway through, and then right before I left. And each of those times, Jay turned me down. The first time, both Jade turned me down, and the executive team at EA had, kind of laughed me out of the exec meeting and for trying to buy Nexon because they just didn't get online in those days. And then on the fourth time, basically, I agreed to come over. And Nexon by that time was, a very substantial company, and and they were getting ready to go public, and it was a great opportunity for me, and it was a great opportunity to join Jay. I wasn't quite sure I wanted to join a company that was founded in Korea and that was now based in Japan. I had family considerations and things like that, but I thought it was just such an exciting company at such an exciting time that I joined and took the company public in 2011. So that's all the history and the background. So I knew the company very, very well. And, during the IPO process, which was about a year, and then for 2 years after that, I was very well versed in the company. And I was I'm not a CPA by training, and I'm not a CFA. I had worked in the finance team in several different companies for a while, but I was really an operating manager, pretending I'm a great finance person. And so I had to be reasonably good to get along in a place like EA. It was a bunch of math people and a bunch of finance people, but Nexon at the time that I became CEO was in a period of transition itself. And we had done the IPO, and we were looking for new growth. And in some ways we had sort of stalled out. And one of the areas that we were really trying to focus on was sort of the opposite of what I was doing at EA, which was, get into the West and build a Western business. And so I thought it was a great opportunity. I will say I gave it I paused a lot. We had a very successful IPO. A lot of people were calling me up and saying, "Hey, would you take my company public too? Could you be a CFO for my company?" And I like that. There's a saying that sometimes people have, which is, being the CFO is sort of 60% of the pay and 20% of the headaches of being a CEO. And so, yes, the CEO job pays better, but it's a lot more stressful than the CFO job, even though the CFO job is pretty stressful. So I gave it a lot of thought. But really, I had a long conversation with Jay and a couple other people on the board, and we worked out an agreement in terms of how we were going to run the company, mostly at his instigation and the way that he wanted to see the company run. So, which was mostly he wanted to be completely hands off and wanted us to run the company. And I guess I'd pause on or just stop on one last point of that, which was, my agreement with Jay was really, look, I don't want to make any decisions, because if I make one decision, I will make all of the decisions. And at that point, he owned 50% of the company. And so he knew that if he started getting involved, he would do it. And that's not how he wanted to spend his life. He didn't want to sell Nexon. He just wanted to own it, but he wanted other people to run it. And
goals,
so
truly goals.
Yeah. So as a result, he said, "Listen, if you screw my company up, I'll fire you. But other than that, you're going to go run the company." And so, that's in some ways scary, but that's the situation of a CEO anyway.
Yeah.
And so it was a very easy regime under which to work. A lot of companies in Korea, especially, but elsewhere in Asia, there's the CEO who's sort of the front end, and then all the decisions are made in the back end.
Mhm.
But usually by the founder who owns most of the stock. That was not the case at Nexon at all.
Yeah.
So that's the story about how I became CEO.
Yeah, and that's kind of I like how you walked through, like, in order to tell the CFO to CEO jump, you have to start all the way back from point cast through EA. That's really, it's interesting that your business relationship with Nexon like started with, you met them while working at one company when they were small. You had these deals that didn't go through for various means later, but it was just kind of one of those like, hey, it didn't work. It sounds like, excuse me, it sounds like it was a, hey, things didn't work out this time, but, keep in touch. Like, we might get to work together later. That really sounds like one of the things that can go right in this industry, right? Is like maybe the stars don't line up for this opportunity together business wise, but if you've got a good vibe going, then years down the line might be when you and someone get to come together and make something special.
Yeah, I mean, I think business, like life, tends to compound and benefit compounding effort. And
Mm-hmm.
the best relationships that I have today are relationships that started a long time ago, and that sort of filter out the folks you don't want to work with, and then you end up working more with people you do like to work with. And
Yeah.
one of the things I loved about Jay, who passed away a few years ago, was
Yeah.
he was very much that way. He was very able to build long-term relationships that he kept for a long time, and kind of kept at it. He kept
Mhm.
at trying to hire me, and I kept at trying to buy his company. And good for both of us that I was unsuccessful and that he was successful. And I think he had
Yeah.
more wisdom when we were younger. We're roughly the same age, or we would be roughly the same age today, but he had more wisdom when we were younger than I did.
Yeah, that must have been really, really hard to hear that he passed away. I guess that, like, my condolences. I can only imagine, to work that closely to someone for so long, and then for that to happen, that's a tough blow.
Yeah, it was awful.
Kind of talking a bit about your Nexon, you talked about helping Nexon expand in the West the way EA was trying to expand into Asia. I was kind of looking back over the track record, and what I remembered being there was, Dirty Bomb from Splash Damage kind of coming up and maybe being a thing. There's like a little bit of a period where y'all were trying with online shooters to sort of bring Nexon's, online expertise in, with, the first person shooter genre being so popular over here. It sort of felt like, were you guys centering sort of these online shooters as the core of your strategy? And was there a conscious effort to sort of take several swings at bat with these different games from different developers that you were trying out with, or are these sort of more disconnected events during the 2010s?
Let's see. So a lot of those decisions really got made before I got to Nexon.
Yeah.
So I inherited some of that, not all of it, but I inherited some of it. There wasn't a conscious effort regarding shooters, although there were a lot of shooter fans within Nexon, so myself included. Yeah. So we ended up doing a lot of that. Of course, there were a lot of MMO fans as well. I think you also have to remember at that time, there was a lot of cross currents in the industry. I mean, if you think about sort of the stuff that's going on now, think about 2008, 9, 10. There was the rise of social. There was the rise of mobile. And then, seemingly completely counterintuitive up comes League of Legends. And so,
Yeah.
I think there was a lot of, okay, what's going on in the industry? The other thing that was going on at the time was we hadn't gotten to quite the scale yet of the costs of AAA game making that we are at now. I've been pretty vocal about this, but the table stakes really for a AAA game in most places is somewhere between $200 and $400 million, which is an astounding amount of money. And by table stakes, I mean that's kind of the minimum development spend that you're going to put to it. And so I, within all that context, we were thinking about new games that would do well. I think we were a little haphazard at the time. Haphazard is maybe
Hmm.
not the right word. We were trying a lot of different things. We could afford to try a lot of different things, which I think in many respects is an the willingness to try and fail is an underappreciated aptitude in the games business, and especially in those days
Yeah.
when the scale was a lot smaller, it was better to try more things. And today, it's very very difficult to pull that off because of because of the scale of
Yeah.
development. But yes, but there wasn't a lot of rhyme or reason like, oh, we must be in shooters or we must be in X. What did happen later is we really got out of casual mobile. And that happened a few
Hmm.
years later. That was 2019. We did a major reorganization. We had an enormous amount of
Yeah.
debate on it, but I was pretty adamant that we brought nothing special to the table to casual mobile in the way that a company like Zynga did, or especially the up and coming Chinese companies, and that we were just going to get
Hmm.
crushed, and that the unit economics were horrible, and so we just wanted to get out of that business.
Yeah.
And if we don't bring anything special to the table, we are not going to win, and it's an ugly, difficult game that we don't really understand well. So that was kind of at the end of that process of trying several different things out.
Yeah, you mentioned in your on your blog, one of your posts is about, quote, the four different game industries, and casual mobile. You mentioned the 2019
Mhm.
reorg, and casual mobile just being this space that's so. I mean, if you think regular games are cutthroat, like my time at a mobile publisher, then Gameville, now it's called Com2uS,
Yeah.
like that was like, if you think normal game economics are cutthroat, like mobile economics are just, they blow my mind. And it's so interesting because a online games company working out of the regions where like a lot of mobile casual success was happening, with some of the games that Com2uS had, like Summoner's War, etc. Still, that being a struggle for you guys, even with your core competencies, is so interesting to think about, just because it's like, you talk about, you've talked on your blogs about like transferability and how dev skills don't automatically translate from one space
Yep.
to another, and yet business folks don't always understand that, right? They're like, well, you're good at online RPGs, why aren't you good
Yep.
at mobile online RPGs? They can't be that different,
Yeah.
right? But they are.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. I don't know if anything that I wrote resonated with you from your experience at Com2uS, but even before the IDFA changes at Apple and then the similar
Yeah.
changes at Google that really even ripped the economics such as they were out of the basically, so people understand what we're talking about. It costs
Sure.
you a certain amount of money to acquire a customer, and we call that CAC, customer acquisition costs. And then
Hmm.
to figure out whether you're paying too much or too little for your CAC, you think about the lifetime value of a customer. So maybe you keep the customer around for a year. I'm just making these numbers up. Maybe you're going to make,
Sure. Sure.
I'm going to totally make these numbers up. Maybe you make $10 expected for that over the period of that year, and it cost you, let's say, $5 to acquire that customer. Then on a gross margins basis, meaning before you pay your office for your offices and your coffee bill and your other things that you got to pay for that are just like overhead, you're clearing $5, right? $10 minus
Yeah.
$5 it costs. The economics in that business don't look like that at all. They look like more like $10 LTV and $9.99 of customer acquisition costs. So you're getting a
Yeah.
penny, and then you don't make it up, and then you got to still pay your overhead and everything else. So. And how people papered over this issue for a long time was they were getting venture capital returns, and it looked like the revenue was going up.
Hmm.
And the venture capital community had been trained that, okay, eventually you're going to make that, but you'll be like Amazon, where it has very bad margins to start with, but then you get such scale and blah 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 blah, and it like didn't work. And I was always very suspicious of it. I had looked at this is early Zynga before Frank Chabot got there. I was like, this business sucks. Like I don't want any part of this business. It's terrible business, and I hope these kinds of economics never come to, let's call it, harder core games, because if so, it's going to be an impossible business. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, no, I didn't. I think what people weren't recognizing at the time though was that these are different businesses. Hardcore games
Mhm.
versus casual games, offline games versus online games. Everything is different. How you count the money, how
Yeah.
you manage the business, who's good at what type of person is good at it, meaning good at development. All those things are and also your whole mindset of how you run the business. Personally, for me, I didn't want to run a business like that because I like to sleep well at night. And if I think my business could fall apart tomorrow, like Farmville did,
Yeah.
um, and I like wake up one morning and I find the whole business is gone, that's going to be terrible. It's not a pleasant place to be, and it's a very, very difficult way to run a business. It's also not great
Yeah.
creatively.
Yeah. I could spend too much time about the creative end, but I remember in 2014 hearing that user acquisition costs were too high. It's just one of those things that's been in my head for the entire time I've been in games. Is in 2014 I started hearing from the people at Gameville, then, or I'm just gonna say Gameville for my part. It's when I was there. They were saying, "Oh yeah, like user acquisition costs are going up every year, and it's a tough nut to crack." And that persists for until about 2019 is when those Apple UFID changes kicked in, I think. And then I saw that and I was like, geez, like that's a full sweep the leg movement on user acquisition, because now a chunk of the audience, to help the audience understand, if I'm following you correctly, Owen, and my memory is correct, this was a change Apple made. At least Apple did. If Google made it, I just don't remember reading the news headline about it, where they limited the ability for apps to track you across other experiences, which made it more difficult to advertise product to you, and that had a cascading downward effect for user acquisition. It's now harder to find the people who might want to throw $200 away in your Diablo. We have Diablo at home RPG, I guess. Like if I were to make something up.
Yes. I, well, we're talking about a couple different things when we're talking about UA costs. One is the IDFA. So first of all, it was very thin margins, as we talked about before. Then IDFA happened, and as you say, it made it harder to track, but harder translates to more expensive to acquire a customer. And so your customer acquisition costs are no longer, in the example that I just gave, again, $5, it's maybe $11 to acquire a customer who's going to use your product. So you're immediately gross margins negative. And so that's problem number one. Problem number two, when people complained about customer acquisition costs, was they thought they had a marketing problem. What they in fact had was a product problem. And what I mean by that is, I I love to play games, and I play a lot of games. And I have two boys, and they love to play games. And a lot of my friends are gamers, and we all compare games. And if you present me yet another game that is exactly like the last 50 games, it's going to be really hard to convince me to download that game. And even if it's free, and even if it's truly free, meaning not some sort of way of tricking me into monetizing, it's a matter of time, right? Like I've got so much stuff going on in my life, like
Yeah.
you've got so many things that are bombarding you from the minute you wake up and look at Instagram in the morning, to the time you go to bed, you're being bombarded. So if you provide a product that is not differentiated, you're going to have a very hard time, and that will translate in your myopic mind, not yours, but like in the maker's myopic mind of, oh, this is user acquisition costs of going on. No, you need to spend $1 billion to break through everything. Sort of
Yeah.
jokingly. So because you're selling what is a commodity, and commodities,
Yeah.
and a commodity is by definition something that is undifferentiated. And
Yeah.
and so it looks like a marketing problem. What it in fact is a product problem. And this problem exists across the games industry. And there's all sorts of sort of psychological reasons for that. But it is a pernicious problem in our industry, I think.
Yeah, and the ground can be very uneven in trying to identify what is your product's actual problem, right? Like if I'm thinking about the mobile product problem, if we're going to stick strictly in there for a second, what I recall was at one point, the company I was working at, we had one successful action RPG hack and slash. Which the thing that blew my mind about that game and other games like it was these games had like autoplay modes. You put it on your desk and the game was there grinding out the
They
core
took the
gameplay
game
for
out of
you.
the
And I'm like,
game.
well, if I don't want to. Yeah, I'm like, what? Well, if I don't want to hack and slash, what am I playing a hack and slash game? And yet, that one was doing pretty well. I worked on another game, same genre, same conceit, same monetization, same everything, and for some reason, and only hindsight's 2020 with all of this, so I want to be careful with how much I
Yeah.
razz my former employer here, but I was sort of surprised that it's like, hey, like, why does your library have two games in the same genre? And it feels like the only difference is the art
Right.
direction. And I think it's what you're talking about, right? Where this was like, oh, we can't market this first game anymore. We need to act like this is a new game for people, and like you said, that's just treating it like a marketing problem, not a product problem of our company needs something to hit a different audience because we're trying to scoop everyone up into this action
Yeah.
RPG. And like you said, this now today is very abstract, where on the one hand, your fast follow of Vampire Survivors could be meeting the audience where they are and you're not a commodity. On the other hand, if you're too slow to the Vampire Survivor follow up, your players are just going to go, oh, I'll just go back and play Vampire Survivors. And it's sometimes very hard to tell where the line is, it feels like, based on folks' conversations I've had.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there's so many different directions you could take that discussion, but to me, it boils down to what business are we really in, and what kind of company do you really want to build? And to me, I got it. Look, there's a lot of different things we can all do. People who are in the games business, particularly on the development side, are have to be very talented to survive in the games business. They have to be technically talented. They have to be creative. They have to, really get into the depths of some very difficult intellectual problems. So it's a very talented group. They could do a lot of different things. They could go into investment banking. They could build bridges. They could build rockets. People who exit the games business oftentimes do very well because they're so talented. And so, are we going to spend our time trying to figure out like what some monetization strategy is? Is that the highest and best use of our time? No, we come to the games business because we got inspired, typically when we were
Yeah.
young, typically by some sci-fi or fantasy book or movie, that we consumed. And we want to make cool stuff. Games are really the sort of the intersection of art and tech. And that's really cool. So as a more fundamental question, like, what are we doing creatively here? And
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes as an industry, we've cargo culted our way into, oh, well, this is a hack that makes me some money for now. There's a little gold bar, little gold coin on the ground. Let's go pick it up. And what you really want to do, if you're going to do something creatively good, is to make a good product that inspires people. And typically that means you're going to go farther out creatively. You're going to do something that's more differentiated, and you're going to work really hard to make it really good. And now, if you
Yeah.
bring that back to business, if you go back, I've given a lot of thought to this over the years. Again, I joined EA in 2000, and it was late 2000, and we all thought at the time that it was going to be Madden and Gran Turismo that was going to take over the industry. And Madden did well, and Gran Turismo did well. But our thesis, what it was that it was finally cinematic graphics and sound are coming to consoles, and it really looks like a movie and blah, blah, blah. It wasn't that at all. First of all, it had a cheap DVD in the PS2, and then it had Grand Theft Auto 3. And Grand Theft Auto 3 lit the industry on fire and just turn it into a rocket ship. And no one had ever seen anything like Grand Theft Auto 3. And I always remembered that. And then I looked at Battlefield 1942, which was really the first, big acquisition that I had done. I'd done some other stuff before, but that was my first big deal at EA. Battlefield was nothing like what was out there in the market at the time. And if you go through the last 20 years and you just put this on a graph and you say fun on the y-axis and different on the x-axis, the stuff in the upper right-hand quadrant of fun and different are the ones that end up being the big, huge breakout hits. And in the games business, you get paid for breakout hits. And so coincidentally, actually not so coincidentally, doing the right thing creatively is actually the thing that is going to make you a lot of money. And it's very hard
Yeah.
to make stuff that is very fun, and it's hard to make stuff that's very different. But what does our industry do? Our industry is stuck in that lower left-hand quadrant of not fun and not different. And first of all, it makes a ton of copycats. And then second of all, it's actually hard to make a fun game, even if you are being a copycat. So, I used to joke, and it wasn't an exaggeration. I'd look at 100 deals a year from internal or external developers saying, I want you to fund my game. Literally
Yeah.
95% of them would be pinned to that lower left-hand quadrant of not fun and not different.
Yeah.
And so meaning I didn't think they were going to really be able to execute on it, but what was clear was that they were not looking at something that was going to be differentiated. So going back to
Yeah.
discussing about the mobile business for many years, and I think Apple has done a lot to really encourage this, quite the opposite of what they try to do. But they don't really understand the games business. The mobile business has been largely not that fun and not that differentiated. And so
Yeah.
anyway, that's the
We
industry.
could. I go once again. I'll sort of go. Oh God, I could go off on like how mobile games have just. There's sometimes when people are like, oh, mobile games, yada yada. I'm like, oh man, that's just the way the platform affected the product quality. I agree. I follow you there, and unfortunately, we don't have time to go down that rabbit hole. Um, Talking about companies being able to do fun and different. You sort of talked about like the ability to take risks and fail being a good asset for game companies, especially when one of the core things on your XY chart there was fun, and no one has figured out how to define fun yet. And the second they do, we might have just broken humanity. But you guys, Nexon had an interesting case study before you got out the door with Mint Rocket and Dave the Diver, and I talk to a lot of devs who say like, yeah, it's a nice daydream to wish like, say like, BioWare pre last year could have had a team dedicated to making dating sims for its games, or Halo Studios should have figured out how to get someone making turn-based tactics Halo to appeal or to capture that wargamer crowd faster than they did with the Halo Flashpoint that they just licensed. And people will go, I would, pitch ideas like that, like how come companies don't do that? And they go, oh, that's nice, but those companies can't spare resources on those things. How do you think Nexon got it right with building Mint Rocket and sort of saying, hey, here's this kind of thing over here. It's going to behave differently. It's going to work differently than the rest of our stuff. And it's going to become, and then they go around and make one of the biggest games of the year it came out. 23, I think, was when it hit 1.0.
Meaning, the question is, how do you make room for innovation like that, or how do you make it happen?
Yeah, I think that's the short version of the question. Thank you for rolling with my long, rambly question.
I used to think that the reason why there's not enough innovation in the games industry is because CEOs are assholes and they don't really want it. And so, when
you and 10,000 gamers on the forums, I said.
Yeah, I mean, I look, I had battled a lot of people over the years to try to get us into more creative and interesting games. And was sometimes successful and sometimes unsuccessful. But I thought that that the question isn't how do I do something that's going to sell a lot, because doing something that sells a lot and makes a lot of money is really a derivative measure of having it, and the core is that the first principle is it something that blows people's minds? Is it really, really cool? Do I want to, and do I want to play it? And if I want to play it, and it really inspires me, are there enough people like me that other people will want to do it too? And so if you ask, like, what's going to make me a lot of money in a short period of time, you're never going to get to a Paradox or, like a Europa Universalis, or you'll never get to a Battlefield, or you'll never get to an Arc Raiders or to a Maple Story. And all those games, and even to a GTA, I think, although I don't, I'm not really privy to what really happened in the beginning. I think a lot in each of those cases. And by the way, Shigeru Miyamoto is a really great example of this. Like, okay, is it something that I think is really, really cool? And are there other people like me who would want to do it as well? Those are pretty simple heuristics. And so, okay, so that was going in what I thought. and that the sort of the system was against that. The way that companies get run was against that. And I thought, okay, how do I set up Nexon so that we can be very nice and an inviting place to make those sorts of bets? Um, and what I found out a lot was that it is such a challenge to get game developers to go way out on a limb like that, because they also don't want to fail for all sorts of reasons, right? Like maybe you've got a young family and you think that your studio gets shut down if you're unsuccessful. That's you could be forgiven for thinking that that is going to happen, because most times that is what happens, right? When something you try fails. Plus, it's not very fun to fail. And plus the numbers are so big and all that sort of stuff. It's one of those you'll never work in this town again situations. So, and also, by the way, Nexon was founded in Korea, does a huge business in China, and is based in Japan. And so there's a lot of sort of hierarchical thinking that makes it more difficult maybe than in a crazy place like Northern California, to challenge people to go do something, nutty that doesn't exist before. So there's all those things going on. I found that I was naive about that, and I couldn't just lecture people into being more creative. And so, how do you do it? Well, one is when someone comes up with an idea that you think might work, then you encourage them to do it. And what you need to do is you need to think about a way to explain this to your shareholders and to your board that they will accept it. And the way that I thought about it is, if I make a number of asymmetric upside bets, this is financial speak now, not creative speak, where it's like a venture capital portfolio where I might lose 10 million here, I might lose 50 million here, I might lose 25 million here, but I might make $1 billion here. And in Japan, in a public company in Japan, that is an anathema. Like, people do not think that way. As a matter of fact, I got encouraged once to apologize to my board of directors for losing 10 million here and 25 million here. And I was like, yeah, but I made 400 million over here and I made another 450 over here. What's your problem? We've already talked about the mistake we made. We won't make the mistake again, but we will keep taking these kinds of risks on, because in a portfolio of bets, that's actually how it works. Yeah. And in public companies in general, they don't like that because people get worried about any sort of failure. And they think, especially if you don't have experience with this, they think that they can just not. The dumb question would be, well, how do you get to that huge $1 billion outcome without the $25 million failures? And the answer is you can't, but they don't know that going in. I always felt that it was important that Nexon, which has the luxury of having these massive forever franchises like Dungeon and Fighter, which at the time I left made well over, I think the number that we had in investor relations was $26 billion in life to date revenue, or Maple Story. These are games that were growing 30% year over year, 35% year over year. At the time that I left 20 years in, that would fund taking on creative risks for the next big breakout hit. And in fact, that was exactly what the Embark acquisition was all about. And this week, right now, the Arc Raiders it just came out a week ago. It is a massive hit. And nobody understood it at the time that we made the acquisition. I've never taken so much, hostility for a deal before, but it was from that. It was from that answer to your question of how you take on creative risks.
Yeah. You have to convince a lot of people after some part of your combination of experience and gut tells you, hey, we'll take the team at Embark for a second. Like, these Embark guys, I don't know if the finals was the first pitch they brought you. I just have no state of knowledge about that. But you've seen what they're offering. In your head, you're going, I can make a case to myself. And then as the business person, your next job is to turn around and make a case to the board and to shareholders that the risk of a $25 million failure is worth it, because it could turn into a $800 million hit. Making up numbers here. I know nothing about Embark's numbers, but the proof is in the pudding. Just look at the Steam CCU for it, and then the finals after its launch. Like, people do. They are 2 for 2 right now on successful live service games, which is incredible in 2025.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, Going back to your question a couple minutes ago was like, okay, how do you make room for the type of creativity that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Another way that you do it is you inspire people and you show them what is possible, because we all get stuck inside our own head.
Yeah.
Embark was the easiest decision I ever made. It was at scale. It was the hardest decision, I think, for the company at the time because the numbers were pretty large. But really, what happened was the team that created Battlefield was Patrick Soderlund was running the studio at EA. He had an incredible run. I had known Patrick from the days that I first met him when I bought Dice for EA. He made it clear that he was leaving EA and left EA. And I thought this is the most extraordinary game developer with the most extraordinary team around him, and extraordinary in a couple different ways. Number one is they were technically very sound. Second of all, they were not obsessed with Hollywood. They were just obsessed with making really cool games. So they didn't need to be big. They didn't need to do something that everybody else was doing. And as a matter of fact, they were sick of doing Battlefield. They wanted to do something different. And they also wanted to do it in a different way. They wanted to introduce, new technology, including AI, for making games, because I thought that would enable them to make much better games over time. And they weren't given any time to do that at EA. And so I said, yeah, we'll do this. We at first invested in them, and they just wanted 9 months to, figure some of the technical parts out. We gave them that, and then they started working on Arc Raiders. Ultimately, the finals was coming along faster, so they launched that first. We needed to make some major changes, as Patrick has talked about, to Arc Raiders. So we gave them the time and ability to do it. But they pulled off absolutely everything that they said they would. Absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And I think they served as an inspiration to not only the rest of Nexon about what's possible when you insist on being creative and doing things in a different way. They've also, I think, are now serving as an inspiration to a lot of the industry about what's possible, in this day and age. One of the things that's inspiring is it doesn't take $300 million to make a new AAA game. It actually takes substantially less than that, like lop off almost a whole zero off of the game development cost. So it's really exciting what they've been able to do.
Yeah, and I give them a lot of credit for cracking. I don't know. I've heard the word extraction shooters, the next big thing for God, maybe even before the pandemic. Because Tarkov, Escape from Tarkov has been around for so long, and everyone's been trying to get a slice of the pie. And to the point that I personally genuinely thought, oh, maybe extraction shooters are just cool for like the small group of people who want to yell at other people while something's hitting them. And Embark really did something that I think is very hard, which is, I don't even know if they went into it thinking, again, you were there for the other pitches, I wasn't, but I don't know if they went in saying we're making an extraction shooter, but they came out the other side with a game in the extraction shooter genre that when I look at it, the first thing I think isn't that's an extraction shooter. The first thing I think is that looks really cool. You're fighting robots and other people, and I don't think about the genre. So that's a huge win on their part for sure.
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll go ahead and use this as the obligatory on the podcast. I've had to go 4 or 5 different times. Like, we can't make the whole thing about AI because once again, we'd be here all day. But Embark's in the news. They have chosen for a couple games now. We're not going to talk about Embark, by the way, just to be clear. I'm going to quickly rehash for the audience. Just, the biggest point of criticism with Embark has been, they use AI voice acting for in-game announcer barks and things that would have... these aren't story-first games with characters, so I'm going to put some of that in context. But that's just to sort of explain, how they're using it to our readers, to the best of my knowledge. Not... for your part, Owen, you wrote the latest piece on your blog as of recording is a long, I encourage everyone to go read it over at owenmahoney.ai. It's a longer piece sort of examining AI in the games from a larger scale. One of the big questions I had coming out of it was you sort of mention 4 or 5 different kinds of AI technologies, from matchmaking based tech to some of the AI tech from early versions of Arc Raiders to LLM based stuff. How do you sort of reconcile a lot of those things are right now getting bundled under the phrase AI, but and a few of them work with overlapping techniques, but they all aren't necessarily what you'd call AI. I guess, like, as you've tried to figure out how you think this tech will work in the industry. Like, how have you sort of reckoned with the fact that some of these things could work with an LLM and some of these other things, like, obviously can't? Like, have you sort of tried to pick apart, like, what is actually part of the change the industry is experiencing versus what's sort of, wait, we've been doing that for ages?
Well, I think you picked out a subtlety of what I was writing about that is really good to pick out, which is some of what people talk about is not necessarily just AI, or that AI exists in a larger question of what are the software tools that we use to make great games. And some
Yeah.
of that of what we do is shockingly low tech, or could be shockingly low tech.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very interesting rat hole to go down. And again, I think there's two places that I know of that are tops in this in the world. One is Embark in the game development side, and one is Nexon has a group called Intelligence Labs, run by a guy who is a very early thinker on AI, going back to our early experiments in 2017. And I wrote about that a little bit in a blog post. But um, I, I guess the point of the piece is a couple fold. Number one is in times of great transition, it is very hard to understand where we sit and what's really going on. And everybody talks about it. So it quickly sounds like a fad. It sounds like another discussion about the metaverse or VR or something like that. But it's not really, in this case, it's not a fad. And so I sort of go through the process of saying, let's put it in its historical context. Number one is, I don't think it's a fad. I think it's really real. And I give a very simple test after sort of blowing up what I thought was ridiculous conversations about NFTs and games and you know, the metaverse and so on. But number two is really what AI, people look at AI as a tool to save costs. That's where everybody's minds first goes. And I think that some of my colleagues who are CEOs in the industry have done themselves no favors by talking about it that way. And because they see it that way, because they get asked about costs all the time. Like, oh, have you got some Deus Ex Machina that's going to mean that you don't have to do $300 million in development spend because the costs have gone up so much and that's why you're uncreative and those sorts of things. Yeah. And I think that the industry, particularly gamers and game developers, have been rightly very suspicious of that sort of talk. Because the issues are so much more fundamental. And but I don't see AI as fundamentally a cost saver. What I see it as an industry grower. And the challenges of the industry are already here. I mean, it's been a bloodbath in the last 2 years in the industry. When I left Nexon, you know, and I was kind of leaving on very much a high note, and I was very excited for Nexon's performance, but I was like, the industry is really in bad shape. And at the time, people were like, hey, Owen, you sound kind of depressed. And I was like, no, I'm not depressed at all. I'm happy as hell. But I think that the industry is in terrible shape, and we're going to have to address these issues. And if I do it, you know, that's what I'm working on. I have to work on next. That's the most important problem to address right now. Relative to AI, you know, I think what the basic way to think about it is as a tool that helps creative people create more and better stuff. And so it will end up like all Schumpeterian revolutions. It will end up being very bad for some people who are part of the industrial process that had to brute force its way through people. And it'll be very good for people who can really create things. And meaning the indie developer, the smaller teams. Embark is a really good example of a team that's maybe 35 people building a really incredible looking game. And you do that through technology. John Carmack has been very eloquent on this topic. You know, he talks about how he used to have to code in assembly to get stuff done, you know, to like make a CPU do something, or then later make it proto GPUs. And now he's got all these tools at his fingertips that he can use, so he can abstract those lower level things that he has to do. That's at a basic level what AI is doing. And you're right to say it's not just AI, it's a variety of tools. We can be much smarter about this in the industry, but we almost insist on thinking of Hollywood as the sort of aspirational form, and what we should be doing is thinking in terms of software. And a good software developer thinks this way. So those are some of the key things that I think about when I think about AI. I don't know if that answers your question, but those are some key points.
It helps, right? I think it helps, yeah, because you've done one thing which anyone looking at, um, whether they're looking at your blog or if someone's trying to pitch them an AI thing to their company, I think it ties into what you said before, thinking about product versus thinking about cost and spreadsheet. I have been personally waging a small war against the idea that, quote, AI can speed up game development because when I heard that, I sort of thought, how? Like, because it to me, it relates to what you were talking about earlier with how do you get teams of people to produce new, interesting stuff? And there's a long library list of process and collaboration issues that can speed up development as it currently exists without needing to even touch an AI tool. And I've had a couple interesting conversations, if I'll pivot in one quick direction in terms of, I just had a conversation, and the story should be up on our site by the time this podcast is live, is I was talking to the CEO of RocketWorks about a development framework they're building, a language-based development framework. And what he said was, he was like, by pure coincidence, LLMs came along, and because LLMs tokenize language, it makes it easier for me to use this language-based tool to query something about like a C++ library, yep, or Vulkan documentation. He's like, before this was a nightmare, yep, now it's easy. And he also drew a fine line where he was like, look, this works for, we're building a language code-based process. This works because code is language. This does not work for Unreal and Unity because that's visual scripting. And he sort of drew clear lines about like what it was doing for their, yep, process. That's a ramble because you asked sort of a question of my question. So I don't have a question at the end of that, but I guess that's where my brain sort of goes. That's where my brain starts to go when I try to think about like, what are people actually using tools for in games? And unfortunately, I talked earlier before about shifting ground underneath us. And unfortunately, AI is just like, I don't even necessarily think for revolutionary reasons. I think it's just, it's a lot of shifting ground. So it can be hard to make sure we're all talking about the same thing when we go into a conversation even. I'll say that.
The analogy that I think of is like the early internet. And again, I just, the parallels to when I started my career, I'm a little older than you. And like, I was like, I'd fly around the world for Pointcast, and I would meet all these newspaper guys, right? And they were like, yeah, they had been in the newspaper or broadcast business for a long time. In the US, it's the Wall Street Journal and Reuters. In Asia, it would be like the Chosun Ilbo in Korea or the Nikkei in Japan and so on. And they were like, oh my God, this internet thing, I'm going to have a homepage and I'm going to put my newspaper up on the homepage, right? And it's like a pixelated version of my newspaper. And beyond that, I don't really know where to think. Like what is this? What happens to my ad business? All this stuff. None of the stuff that we live on today, except for maybe, the Wall Street Journal on a homepage. Other than that, everything is different about how the news is delivered today, how we are entertained. I mean, the TikTok was 3 or 4 major generations of technology behind the whole idea of, hypertext, which is what they called it at the time, like where they, you click through stuff. So we're very much in that same space right now with AI, where there's this massive new set of tools that get dumped on our head. And we can only see like in a very fog of war sort of way, right in front of our face. And, but what I think it's clear to say is it does change the underlying way in which we create things, create creative product in a very substantial way. And it will deliver and it will keep evolving as we iterate on these things.
Yeah. If I were to ask one more question based on it, you have an idea in there about the one programmable layer of creativity. And in there, you sort of mentioned compressing voice acting and NPC dialogue alongside code, right? And I think I follow your thinking based on what we talked about here, right? Like if a team is working on a game, like in theory, if I'm thinking, I'll kind of flip the script and say, if I'm a writer, because I work on games on the side, and I want to make like kind of some of the dream strategy games in my head, it would be great if instead of having to either learn the tool or learn the software, if I could just say, hey, I need some pieces on the board, I need this kind of animation stuff, and then I, as this kind of creative person, if those are things before that were like super out of reach, if those are in reach, I can use my core creative instincts for the craft and put it there, and then maybe that's it. But at the same time, when I read it sort of the way that it was phrased there, I sort of look at that and I go like, well, if some of these elements are extracted from game development, like voice actors, like writers, like myself, I'm biased here, I sort of wonder if that creates a risk of something that people do love about games getting sliced out. I can also see your point about, like some of the ways we only have these professions in games is because of the industrialized nature of production to date. If I stick strictly to writing for a second, avoid voice acting because that's a more complex, that's a little bit more outside my remit. That's a better way to say it. For an online game, if you're producing all those quests for like, say, some of the, or even go back to my time at Nexon, like just localizing those quests.
Yeah.
I can sort of see that like the only reason we have localization as a profession is because that was the only way to take text from one language and convert it to another. And I've certainly heard back and forth on whether machine translation, broad phrase, includes AI, but machine translation broadly is capable of replacing localizers. And there's some interesting dynamics that have come out about it where the answer is no, but also maybe yes. And I think actually to complete I'll complete this in a moment of I understand sort of what you're saying is like we only have localizers because we needed localizers. We wouldn't have localizers if the software could do what localizers do. I sort of think I understand where you're coming from on that and how that affects these other creative roles. Thank you for letting me ramble for a second. It took me time to piece my thoughts together there.
Yeah, no. Well, let's use an analogy again. 100 years ago, there was a thing called a calculator. And a calculator, or 150 years ago, in the time of John D. Rockefeller, and there would be rooms full of calculators. What were calculators? Were they machines? No, they were human machines. And it would be a room full of people who would do like longhand division and addition and subtraction on a spreadsheet, which was a piece of paper. And they were massive organizations, and they were an old industrial process that as calculators could be mechanized, that job went away. And so much of what I did at Nexon was running this large industrial process that involved 9,000 people that got in the way of the creative work, and it was a very big problem, but it was a necessary problem. And so now, if you are a creative person, if you're, like my son's 20, he would love to be able to make games, but guess what? Now he kind of can with a little bit of Python and some, and some other stuff, because he's got all these tools that have come at him that he can now go do stuff. What I'm saying is, whether we like it or not, this is coming to the games industry, and there is a software layer where motion capture and voice and code are all part of the same question that a software developer can use. And what I mean by that is a creative software developer.
Yeah.
And so it empowers the creative person. And I think part of your question is, well, what if a lot of this stuff ends up as AI slop and it sucks and so on and so forth? Well, I think that's a really, really important question. And what I continue to be inspired by, or not inspired by, because that sounds like such a, I don't know. What I can continue to observe in the games industry is that quality does sell. And again, we're looking at it right now. Play our creators or the finals and look at it and say, is it a quality game? It may not be to your taste, but you certainly can't fault it for being quality. And people go to that, right? So in all this slop, which by the way also included a whole lot of people in a lot of all these different games, like thousands and thousands of people that it competes against with. And here's a lean team of highly creative, highly technical, capable people, and they end up making something that we all want to play. I think that is the way of tools coming to an industry that help us put out better creative product. It enables the creative product. It will also have the effect of there will be more slop, that's for sure. Just like there's more junk mail as a result of email than there was from paper, because paper had hard costs associated with it. So that's the way that I think about it. But there's one last thing that I think is very important here, which is I also think that we're just talking about the near term question of, you know, time and effort and therefore cost. And I don't think that's the most interesting part. I think it's going to make the industry grow. And the way it does that is by changing the nature. As we understand how the medium works better, we'll stop thinking of it as a tool and think of it as a new platform or new medium, just the way that the internet, grew the media business by a lot. Now, the traditional old media business had a very hard time as a result of the internet, but it enabled a whole new generation of people to rethink how what we could do with media, because we now have interactive media. And I think the same thing is going to happen here. I wrote a piece a few months ago that I really think that once again the industry is going to triple. We're now about $200 billion. And I made a bottoms up case and a tops down case. I didn't talk about AI at the point, but boy, I got a lot of resistance on it because people were like, no, it's just not going to happen this time. This time is different. I'm like, we are now in the middle of a massive platform transition. I always invite a lot of feedback, but I didn't find that I'm incredibly bullish about what is going on in the industry right now, and I think it's going to triple the size of the industry again.
Yeah, I think what I hope is, and I hope to try and bring, what's funny is I'm also always bullish about games, and I think I also try to recognize I do it from reporters have both a very large perspective and a very small perspective, because what I sometimes like to say is like, I talk to more devs than most devs I know, but I also sometimes can only work with what people are saying publicly. So that means I acknowledge sometimes I'm like years behind the curve with like what is happening, because people just aren't ready to talk about it yet. So my bullishness comes from a more narrow perspective. I think weirdly, or I hang on, I'm trying to find the thought. This always happens to me. It actually, if I'm bullish, it's because I sort of look at it at the end of the day and go, people want to play games and they don't care about how games are made. And the people who want to make games have big visions, and also like right now are struggling to find some of the organizational, financial, and in some cases software structures to bring people those games. And at the end of the day, some of those problems are solvable, and they're also subject to huge external change, just like like we're living through. A small one is happening right now with Google Play, right? And the Google Play Store opening up, air quotes, because it's not the full crack open that Tim Sweeney wanted per se. But things like that are going to come through and shift how things are done. And when you shift how things are done, I agree with you. I totally think the game industry could triple again.
Well, it's already happening. I mean, look what's happening. Like, I was playing Mega Bonk last week. That's a hell of a game.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
all
really
of these, small team games. Yeah.
Repo. I play with my son in his college dorm roommates, and we just have an incredible time. And that wasn't possible a few years ago. You used to have to go through major publishers in order to put out games like that and have them see the light of day. And so, but guess what? When you put out amazing games, more people want to play games. They want to do it instead of watching Netflix, which, by the way, is the quality bar is going down. And our industry grew substantially as a result of Fortnite. Thank you, Tim Sweeney and team. And the great games tend to bring in large audiences, and so we have this. We've run this script before, and it works. But what I don't like about the industry is so much of what I spent time on at Nexon when I was running. Again, it was roughly 8,500 people when I left. 70% of my day would be about running the industrial process. And it was, and I would eke out a 30% of my day to be able to get to the part that was really value added. And I think that is true of every major CEO of every major game company. It's how do we organize 500 people here? How do we get a sound team spun up of 25 people here? How do we deal with this game that was unsuccessful? That is all overhead. And by the way, if you're a creative person who got in the games business, it's no fun to work in a factory. I mean, let's just face it.
Yeah.
It's no fun to run a factory. It's no fun to work in a factory. And it is a terrible, and it's a terrible metaphor for how to build great creative product.
Yeah.
And if any tool, including AI, allows us to get around that in aggregate. Now, again, it affects different groups differently, but in aggregate, if it allows us to be more creative, we're going to get better product. We're going to have a more successful industry, and everybody's going to have more fun building stuff because we're going to be competing on creativity rather than on industrial processes, which are never that interesting.
Yeah, and and if anything, industrial processes are the most vulnerable thing. It's funny that like when it comes to some of the conversation we talk, they're more fragile. I think saying they're more fragile is a quicker way to get it than where I was going to go. Because what I would really like to do, we can shake off some of the talking about the industry, the gunk here for a second. Because I would like to do is on this podcast we do a thing where in talking about video games, there are a lot of people who put themselves out there forward. They talk to folks like me. I am a extrovert of some kind who goes out and talks up, but there's so many people who make games really work, who sort of like stay a bit in the background or do something really important on the side but don't come forward. Is there anyone like that? Anyone you love to get sort of celebrate or shout out today who you've like saw us do some really great work in games, who've seen maybe they are still doing work? Is there anyone you'd like to give that kind of shout out to? You're not at a company right now, so usually I ask people who's on their team. Yeah. But because you're a little more of a free agent now, I got to ask you to think a little bigger.
Well, I'd say I give you four quick ones. First, two people I don't know, and two people I do know, or two groups of people I do know. The people I don't know, I would say Zeekers, who created Lethal Company. I don't know him. He's got he goes by Zeekers, but I follow his blog. I think he's just a really interesting guy, and I assume he's a guy, and I just really, really, really love what he created. The developers are Repo as well. They're bringing such humor and spirit, almost sort of swashbuckling spirit. I've talked to Tynan Sylvester a lot about this, who created RimWorld, who wrote the single best book on video games development that I've ever seen by a long shot. I just love his book, and I think he's an example of the type of person. I mean, he's well known and well respected, but I'd say new generation, it would be those two. Then I would say, I was just exchanging emails of congratulations with several people in the Embark team yesterday. And I'm having dinner with Patrick Soderlund tonight here in Tokyo. And I just, so much of what they do, I think some combination of those people are what I call or what I was thinking of as sort of like the equivalent of a Christopher Nolan in our games industry, meaning someone who's insists on great aesthetics, insists on doing something very different and very new. To consume their content, you have to use your brain. They're technically very proficient. There's several people at Embark that are like that, and they just kind of don't care about fame. They just care about making great stuff that blows your mind, and they sort of insist on doing it that way. Like that was how we were able to get them to come over to Nexon, was we had an agreement that we would give them space to be able to do that. And I just think that whole team at Embark is unbelievable, like just off the charts good. But a lot of people didn't really understand that until pretty recently. And then there are a bunch of people at Nexon who work in, and this goes back to your AI topic. They work in live game operations. And they said, hey, this is in 2016, 2017. There's this AI stuff that's going on. There's machine learning stuff that's going on left and right. And there's AI, it's coming up. Okay, how do we apply this to live games to make them better? And they started working on how do we take this technology and really apply it. Now, they could have done the same old thing and say, well, we're going to hire some more people and we got a hire up, we're going to do the standard budget battle. Instead, they said, we'd actually like to make it smaller because we'd like to scale our teams better and put them to a higher and better use. And they did this behind the scenes, and they get a lot of credit within Nexon like from the live game operators. I was this is going back a couple of years. I was complimenting the MapleStory team for their unbelievable success in making this forever franchise grow at not single digit rates 20 years in, but like double digit rates, and then well into double digit rates, like 30, 40, 50% year over year growth. I mean, it's just been amazing. And they were like, well, yeah, thanks. But part of it is me being so smart and great and you should give me a raise. But the other part is those intelligence labs guys have given us tools that are unbelievable. They allow us to scale. Yeah. We used to have to do things by dashboards that now the AI brains, and there's millions of them, allow us to just make the game experience better by sanctioning bots or by doing figuring out who the big whales are, who have a great social network, and making sure that they have a fun experience, and like all this suite of tools that they developed. It's not sexy. When I used to talk to investors about it, and when I talk to people even today, they're like, "Oh, that stuff's so boring. Tell me about robots and AI and in doing." So it sounds like Black Mirror. This is all back office sort of stuff, but it's just so incredibly compelling and so applicable. And it allowed Nexon to scale a ton, right? Like make a better product with the same amount of people. And the new people that Nexon has been hiring, and it has been hiring, net by a lot, is they get put to higher and better uses. So that's my long-winded answer to your question about the unsung, the people who are not really talked a lot about it in the industry. And I would like a lot more people like that who are being very creative to get a lot more airtime. I think, I really like your question a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what we try and do here in Game Developer in podcast form and in ye old articles of a little bit of old media, just a newspaper on a website kind of way. But no, yeah. And hey, I got long-winded. If you got long-winded, what are podcasts for but for letting the wind go long? Owen, thanks so much today. It's always a joy when you get to talk to business people who are as excited about the creative product as the people working on them, the people playing them, the people like the schmucks like me covering it. Like it's just a nice time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Owen for coming on the show. Be sure to check out his blog at owenmahoney.ai. I don't think he'll stop sharing thoughts on the business anytime soon. For more from us at Game Developer, be sure to visit www.gamedeveloper.com, follow us on major social platforms, and subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find me on Blue Sky at bryantfrancis.me. Today's episode was edited by Pierre Landreau. Our theme music is by Mike Meehan. Thanks for listening. Owen and I may not see eye to eye on AI, but it's nice to agree that game devs, not any particular tool, will be what helped the industry bounce back.